Hello, welcome back to my channel. Tonight I'm going to give you a Cliff Notes version of my life. I'm going to hit all the high points, but not give you all that much detail. I was born in 1971 into a small family in Prophetstown, Illinois. My earliest memories are about my older brother Rich and the fact that he had been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when he was 2. And my mom tested my urine with ketone strips all the time just to make sure I wasn't becoming diabetic too. And then my parents sent my older brother Rich and I to 2 different summer camps. I went to YMCA summer camp. My brother went to a diabetic camp where they taught him how to give himself his own insulin, using his own syringes, etc. Whereas YMCA summer camp, it was more of the traditional solo camp where there was a main cabin where the administration office was and where the cafeteria was. And then there were 2 different trails. One was going down a row of girls' cabins. The other one went down a row of boy cabins. Every cabin had a cabin counselor who is, I think, a high schooler or maybe a middle schooler. Either way, they're older than the kids who were staying in the cabins. There was where I first learned how to shoot .22 rifles and how to do archery, canoeing, whitewater canoeing, and regular slow, easy river canoeing, rock climbing, and such outdoorsy things like that. They also tried to indoctrinate us into Christianity by making us go to what they call the chapel every morning, where one of the main office counselors gave a sermon and talked about being good and productive members of society and things like that. It didn't work. I didn't stay Christian very long. My mom won't like that I said that, but it's the truth. So then my parents got divorced when I was about 9 years old. And my mom and my brother and I moved to a small house in the middle of a cornfield at a nearby farm. I think it was just the only full-size house she could afford the rent on. My mom was a LPN nurse. She worked at a nearby nursing home. My dad was a computer technician back in the old days of punch card computers that he gave my mom child support for my brother and I. I don't know how much it was initially, but that became relevant later when I went to college, because to help me pay my remaining debt for college. He would send me the child support check he had been sending to my mom all along, and then I would use it to pay the school directly, along with my student loan and my Pell Grant that covered my college debt entirely. My college, not debt, that's the wrong word. Tuition was the word I should have used. That paid for all my tuition altogether. I did end up paying off my student loan early many years later. My dad wanted to give us a head start on technology. When we were very young, he used to give us Christmas presents and birthday presents bought from Radio Shack that were learning sets to help teach you about electronics and technology, where you'd breadboard simple circuits to do simple tasks. So that helped my brother and I both in our first terms at the college we went to, because we already knew everything they were teaching us. Suppose technically my brother went to 2 colleges. First he went to DeVry in one of the suburbs of Chicago. He had a roommate in the student housing he lived in. But something about that program didn't sit well with my brother, and he ended up dropping out and then going to a smaller technical college closer to where we lived called Hamilton Tech. And that's where I went to college too. My brother blazed the trail for a lot of my life. So I went to Hamilton Tech in the first term of lab where they taught us breadboarding and things like that. It was all the stuff that I'd learned my whole childhood from those Radio Shack sets. So it's pretty easy for me. I was working beyond the assignment a lot of times. Then we got to the unit where they're teaching us more complicated things like figuring out what was broken in a TV and fixing it. So for CRTs, that's the kind of tube that a TV has, or a early computer monitor. There's a thing called a flyback transformer, and the lab televisions in my class, they had extended the cable going to the TV tube, but they didn't use the right kind of heat shrink to protect the cable. It needed to be thicker because flyback transformers are a lot of voltage. So much so that anytime someone's arm gets too close to it, it would arc to your arm and shock you with I think it was 80,000 volts for a color TV. I was the first guy in class to get hit by that. Blew me back to the other side of the aisle between the tables. Scared the crap out of me. I jumped ahead. I have a habit of doing that. But after we moved to that small house in the middle of the cornfield, I had ridden my bike down the highway in front of our house to go to our neighbor's farm to play with their kids. Then when the sun started setting, I told them I had to go home, got on my bike, started riding back to my house. I had seen headlights down the highway behind me, so I was riding in the gravel on the shoulder. Apparently not far enough in the shoulder, because just a few minutes later, I woke up on my back with my bicycle wrapped around my legs. Seems that a pickup truck that had really wide mirrors so he could pull his horse trailer went speeding by me, and his mirror hit me in the back of the head and knocked me forward over my handlebars. I started screaming for help, and the neighbor kids came running down the same highway dangerously just like me. Found me, and I told them to go get my mom. So they ran up to my house, got my mom. She called for an ambulance. Then my mom drove up with the neighbor kids in the car. She got out and started looking at me. I told you earlier she was a nurse, so she knew how to care for someone in my condition. Then a little bit later, an ambulance rolled up next to me on the highway. Then as the ambulance was picking me up to take me into the ambulance, the guy that hit me pulled up. Apparently he finally realized he had hit someone when he tried to look in his mirror and it was all bent up. Then he turned around and came back. Found out later he had been driving home from the bar, of course. I was in the hospital for about a week. The only thing I really remember from the hospital say is that they brought in an Atari 2600 so I could play it on my TV. The pediatric unit had just gotten the Atari. I was the first kid to be able to use it. I had an Atari at home, so... Wait, no, I didn't have an Atari at home yet. Scratch that then. My mom had met a new man in a nearby city, and eventually we moved in with him, and the two of them got married. That man was an abusive asshole. One morning when I was first developing symptoms of diabetes, when I was having trouble waking up in the morning, he decided to wake me up with a firecracker between my toes. Then he blamed it on the electric blanket I had been using. Anyway, at some point, my mom decided it was time to move away, so we found another house in the middle of downtown Dixon, Illinois. Not in the middle, on the edge of Dixon, Illinois, but still inside the city limits. while I was living there, I was having more symptoms of diabetes, including frequent urination and muscle pain, dehydration, things like that. And I noticed the symptoms. I knew what they were because of my brother. So when I was constantly having to ask a teacher at school to let me use the bathroom, I told my mom about it. Said, "Mom, I think I'm diabetic." I told her why I thought so. So she took me to my brother's doctor at the nearby hospital, and they tested me and verified that I was type 1 diabetic now. Talking about this stuff still upsets me. And it's that type 1 diabetes that was the background cause for my recent stroke and all of my other major medical problems. Heart disease, kidney disease, everything. Back in the day, the insulin that was available didn't work very well. So it was hard back then to control your blood sugar, especially since when my brother and I were first diagnosed, home blood sugar test kits didn't exist. That didn't come about till much later, when I was about 12 years old. So I couldn't properly control my blood sugar back then. I could have done better than I did, but it's pretty difficult when you have to do it on a urine test strip instead of a blood test strip, because that only tells you what your blood sugar was hours ago, not what it is right now. Anyway, so my older brother, when he graduated from college, he had an associate's degree and he got a job in Schaumburg, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago. Then when I graduated, I moved in with him in Schaumburg, and I had been sending resumes out for about 4 months before that, and I had gotten an interview at a local photocopier repair company. That was a horrible job. I hated working there. But then while I was working there, one of the resumes I had sent 4 or 5 months earlier through the job placement program at the school had come through with Motorola. They had sent me a letter that was forwarded from my hometown to where we live now. I went to that interview and got that job. So both my brother and I were working, making okay money for the time anyway. I think I was hired at $23,000 a year. My brother was making a little bit more than that. He was working at a computer networking support company called Innovative Computer Products. After living with my brother for several months, he and I were at each other's throats over various things. eventually I decided I needed to move out. So I got an apartment about a mile away from his. And from that point on, I was living by myself. And the local hobby store had this girl working behind the counter that I had the hots for. And one day, I asked her if she wanted to go to a movie. She said yes, so we went to a movie. It was, what was the name of that movie? Can't remember. Anyway, we went to a movie, and she was driving me back home afterwards, and in her tape deck in the car was the latest cassette from Susie and the Banshees, a band that I'd never heard of. So I asked her about it. She said that it's a goth band. And I said, what's goth? And that question changed my life forever. She told me about the goth scene in Chicago. She asked if I wanted to go to the goth club downtown. And I said, sure. I'd never been downtown, so when she drove me down there, it was an exciting thing for a small town kid like me. We started going to goth night at a club called Neil on Clark Street in Chicago. We went every Tuesday and most Fridays. Tuesday was the goth night. Friday was kind of a mix of techno, industrial, goth, and 80s music. It was a fun night. After a while of going to goth nights and getting used to the scene, I decided I wanted to move downtown. So I left my apartment in the cushy suburb of Palatine, Illinois, and moved into the Lakeview neighborhood in Chicago, right in the middle of where all the cool punk and goth stores were, and the music stores and all that kind of stuff. I got a tiny little 425 square foot studio apartment in a Victorian apartment building on Belmont Avenue. It was a great location, walking distance from Lake Michigan and walking distance to 3 different music stores, a ton of different goth and punk fashion stores, even Wrigley Field, home of the Cubs, but I never went to a game the whole time I lived there. Sports just wasn't my thing, it never was. Still isn't. So anyway, at a time when there were 3 different goth nights you could go to, I would go to Neil, to Spin, which was right near my apartment, and then a club called Crowbar that had a goth night, where the bartender was a friend of mine and the DJ was a friend of mine. While I was going there, I started getting very interested in this girl named Amy, who was the gothiest goth girl I'd ever tried to ask out. She eventually got uncomfortable with my attempts to ask her out on dates, so she took her best friend and shook her in front of me to go, look at this girl, ask her out, that kind of thing. Used her friend as a shield so I would leave her alone. Eventually, I started dating that girl, whose name was Maura Moriarty. Cool name for a goth chick. And after dating her for a while, which basically just meant going out to eat and going to nightclubs together, she asked if she could move in with me. I'm like, sure, okay. So she moved into my tiny little studio apartment. The idea was that after she moved in with me, she would get a job in the area to help contribute to the rent. Because I was barely making rent on my own. Now that I was buying food for 2 people, it was even harder. Well, she never got a job. It got to the point where we were barely making ends meet. Having cup of noodles and toast for dinner every night because we couldn't afford anything better. So I told her she was going to have to move out. She had been living with her parents before that, so I didn't feel bad about kicking her out. Eventually, her dad showed up and moved her out, took her back home. And that was the last time I ever saw her. I've tried using social media to find her once in a while and see how she's doing, but I haven't been able to find her. With such a unique name, you'd think it'd be easy, but maybe she did like me and changed her name. It wasn't long after that that I changed my name for religious reasons. Because Maura had introduced me to paganism and modern Wicca. So yeah, I became a pagan and a male witch from that point forward. That upset my mom, but once I explained to her the reasons why and had several different religious conversations with her, made sure she knew I knew the Bible well enough to understand it, and I still didn't want to be Christian. It upset her, but it wasn't as much upset as it was before. Okay, this video is super long now, so I'm gonna sign off.
Okay, I'm coming to stop it. Alright. Bye.
Bye.